This morning, I watched all 3 hours and 7 minutes, or maybe it was 3 hours and 6 minutes and 57 seconds of Joe Rogan's conversation with Tucker Carlson on the Joe Rogan Experience. And it was the second coming, and probably just on a much higher level. It was the second coming of the Katt Williams interview. We are in the year of truth, and the truth is making everybody very, very, very uncomfortable. I'm going to try to unpack the entire, condense the 3-hour conversation that Joe Rogan and Tucker Carlson had today. I'm going to do it without playing clips because Joe Rogan and his crew, they're not about allowing us to, exploit their content. They don't want to share, and I don't want to get hit with copyright issues. But if you have not watched the 3-hour conversation between Joe Rogan and Tucker Carlson, you need to. It's very important. It's more important than even the Katt Williams interview on Club Shay Shay with Shannon Sharpe. We'll talk about it today. Stay tuned. Welcome to Fearless with Jason Whitlock. I'm Jason Whitlock, your host. Happy Tuesday. Thank you for joining me. We have an awesome show planned for you today. Also, stay tuned or check out exclusive, extra Fearless content on Blaze TV. Go to blazetv.com/fearless. Use the promo code Fearless, and you can save $20 on your yearly subscription. If you didn't check out my conversation that I had about Bill Maher and what's going on with him and why he has seemingly been red-pilled without admitting it, you can see that if you're a Blaze TV subscriber on Fearless Extra. Become a Blaze TV subscriber. Today's episode is brought to you and sponsored by Covenant Eyes. Covenant Eyes has been the #1 trusted software for over 23 years for Christians seeking to live a porn-free life. Get started on your path to recovery and visit covenanteyes.com to sign up and use my promo code Fearless for 30 days free. Today, the comic Dave Smith is going to join me on the second half of this conversation to help me unpack what I experienced this morning, today, the Joe Rogan Experience with Tucker Carlson. As I told you all at the top of the show, we're going to have to do this a little different than when I unpacked Katt Williams and Shannon Sharpe's conversation. Joe Rogan and these guys are a little bit more territorial about their content. And so I'm not going to be able to play you clips. So if you haven't seen the interview, you're going to have to trust my detailed explanation of what transpired in the interview. I'm going to try to do that to the best of my ability so you can follow the conversation. But if you have not seen the interview, you need to watch it. After this show, I'll prep you for it so you'll know what you're actually watching. But you need to experience the full 3 hours. Don't take the highlights. You need the full 3 hours to fully understand. I'm going to give you a Reader's Digest version, a what do they call the little things I used to read instead of reading a book? It's not a syllabus, is it? Regardless, I'm gonna give you a condensed version of of that entire conversation under the theme, and because this was the theme of their 3-hour conversation. We're in spiritual warfare right now. That was the point of this conversation between Joe Rogan and Tucker Carlson. And it's clear as day what side Tucker Carlson's on. The scales have come off his eyes. He's had a spiritual awakening, and he is talking about things through the clear lens, a biblical worldview. And I'm not saying he's 1,000% right. I'm not saying he's all the way down his spiritual journey. But that's how he's interpreting the world, And that's why the world makes sense to him right now. We are in a battle of good versus evil. And so Joe Rogan and Tucker Carlson had a conversation about good versus evil and this spiritual warfare that we're in. Joe Rogan, I think, is more in the middle than Tucker Carlson. I think that he's open to Tucker's point of view, but I still think Joe is interested in a secular worldview, or maybe he's just not where Tucker's at. But this conversation that they had was fascinating, and it piggybacks right off the Katt Williams, Shannon Sharpe interview that 60 some odd million views, 70 some odd million views by now. This Tucker Carlson interview with Joe Rogan has 6 million. It's at a much, much higher level. And I'm not saying that to denigrate Katt Williams and Shannon Sharpe at all, because they had a magnificent conversation, and I thought Shannon Sharpe did an excellent job of speaking just enough to keep Katt Williams talking and expounding on things. And they did it in a far more entertaining, light-hearted, although it was very serious. But this was, and not that, because Katt Williams could have jumped right into this conversation. Shannon Sharpe could have been somewhat involved in this conversation. But this was a highly intellectual conversation driven by Tucker Carlson, and Joe Rogan was a passenger or a vehicle that was in a car where Joe Rogan was in the driver's seat, but Tucker Carlson was driving the conversation. Tucker Carlson clearly had a conversation that he wanted to have on a major platform that defined in great detail where we're at in the world. And so there are things that the internet has picked up on, details within this conversation, but I haven't, and I've seen that play out over social media, over X/Twitter, where people are reacting, Tucker Carlson says America's evil for dropping the atomic bomb. And they're nitpicking, Tucker Carlson, he ripped Bari Weiss. He without naming him, he shredded Ben Shapiro. That if you want to get down in the little details, you can. And again, that's where it was Katt Williams-esque. But the majority of this conversation, the entirety of this conversation, was a high level conversation about where American culture is, where global culture is, and what's your worldview on what's transpiring here. Do you believe in artificial intelligence and science? Or do you believe in God and his creation of the world? Do you believe in evolution? Do you believe in creation? This was so perfectly timed and so necessary that I hope that I can do it justice, but I just want to, having been a frequent guest on Tucker Carlson show, having spent some time with Tucker Carlson in Florida, communicating with Tucker over the last, let's say, 7-8 years, watching the scales come off his eyes, watching this very secular person start understanding the world from a biblical, a spiritual point of view, and him going on Joe Rogan's podcast to really, if you know what you're listening for, and if you're fully informed, he's explained why is there so much beef and bickering back and forth between so-called conservatives. And what you're looking at in Tucker Carlson is someone who no longer believes in conservatism. I'm not saying he said that. I'm not saying that's what he's told me. I'm saying that's my interpretation based off of knowing Tucker Carlson, being a frequent guest on his Fox News show, having spent some time with him, communicating somewhat regularly with him. My interpretation, not that he's told me this, but my interpretation, we're looking at a man that no longer believes in conservatism. And I say hallelujah for that. Because the point of this show and the overarching narrative of this entire fearless movement, there are no political solutions for spiritual problems. I've been saying that since day one. And I sit here and I look at one of the largest voices in American media who in his way is saying like, hey, if you really want to understand the world, you must accept and acknowledge the spiritual aspects of this world, of this universe that God created. If you want to understand it through science and through man's eyes, you're going to fall short of a full understanding of this world. And so this was amazing. And so because this was addressed early on in the conversation. It's a 3-hour interview conversation. I think it's 36 minutes into this conversation is where they talk about the atomic bomb. And Tucker kind of unpacks that he thinks dropping the atomic bomb on Japan was a mistake. And he says that evil people did that. And that upsets a lot of people. And how dare Tucker Carlson is saying America did something evil by dropping the atomic bomb. And again, it's not that I agree with everything Tucker said, because I'm not for sure how I feel about, because I want to do my own independent research. But my instincts are you drop a weapon of that mass destruction. I'm not sure if it can be branded any other way. And so, but that's not a final conclusion. That's just a thought. And this is what was so important about the conversation between Joe Rogan and Tucker Carlson. And again, Joe Rogan was more of a passenger in this conversation, a facilitator of this conversation, where it's no different. That's why I love the comparison between Shannon Sharpe and his Katt Williams interview. Shannon Sharpe was a passenger in Katt Williams' conversation. He asked a few questions, but Katt did the most of the talking. Katt drove the conversation. That's not me criticizing Shannon Sharpe. That's not me criticizing Joe Rogan. That's me acknowledging that they sit there and go, hey man, I'm sitting here in front of an intellectual heavyweight who wants to unpack and say some things. I'm going to facilitate that. I'm going to push back and try to make the person a bit more interesting, but I'm going to let them drive this conversation. And that's what Tucker Carlson did. And he started with, intentionally in my view, and started with probably the most significant, and probably, and again, I'm thinking this through as I talk, and I want to repeat, that's why this was so important. The kind of conversations that Joe Rogan and Tucker Carlson had are the kind of conversations they're trying to restrict from the public. Two intellectuals can't sit and talk and say imprecise things. They all must say all the perfect pre-approved what the government, what the establishment wants. And if they veer outside those lines, oh, they've done something terrible and we must cancel them. And YouTube and Google and the machine must do things to limit them. People can't speak imprecisely. That's infringing on our free speech. And that's why this conversation was so important, because it opens the door for like, let's allow people to speak imprecisely. It's important. It will take us to a higher level of understanding. And so Tucker Carlson throws it out there in his view that the dropping of the atomic bomb is basically immoral. And it's an evil act. And our government did it. And he started the conversation there with something that is as significant to world history as anything that has happened in the last 150 years. And again, some of you may hop in the chat and say, no, this was more significant, this event, that event, whatever. And that's great. Maybe I'm wrong. But dropping that bomb, to me, is the most significant act in world history of the last 150 years, and maybe longer. I'm just stream of conscious, watch the deal, trying to share with you. But he did that intentionally as a defining moment. And he argued that the dropping of that bomb in the mid-1940s to allegedly end World War II marked the moment where America fully pivoted into a secular society and started believing that, no, we're God. We're so smart. We're so advanced. We can create weapons that can destroy the world. That's an intoxicating belief. That's an intoxicating invention. We've created nuclear weapons that can destroy what every other group of people in the history of humanity. Man is nowhere near as smart as God. Man cannot destroy what God created. And so now we drop this bomb on Japan, and we develop the belief like, we're all powerful. We're masters of the universe. We can destroy this planet, and we can create a superior, something superior to humanity. And eventually they got there because it was masterful. I don't know if it was orchestrated. I just know Tucker drove an incredible 3-hour conversation where all the dots got connected, and they eventually ended up at artificial intelligence and Joe Rogan unpacking how artificial intelligence is going to create something that's superior to man, and that this artificial intelligence is going to lead to a creation that is God. And that's when it just came into full bloom, like, wow. You got one guy, and I'm not demonizing Joe Rogan, because they were having a conversation. And I can't say Joe Rogan absolutely believes this and he opposes everything Tucker Carlson was saying. I'm saying they were having a masterful conversation, the kinds of conversations we need so that we can understand what the people in power, what the puppet masters, what it is they're doing and constructing, and what the consequences are for us. That's the conversation that Tucker Carlson drove and Joe Rogan allowed, and it's why Tucker Carlson is so dangerous and so vilified. And he's being vilified not just by leftists, but by conservatives as well. Everybody in the establishment is uncomfortable with Tucker Carlson because he's making everyone else's job harder. He's making us all start dealing with uncomfortable truths. It was masterful what these two men accomplished. And I have to start off by hat tipping Shannon Sharpe and Katt Williams. They laid the foundation for this conversation. I'm not saying they did it intentionally, but what they did in their interview prepared us for this conversation that Joe Rogan and Tucker Carlson. It will not be as popular as the Katt Williams, Shannon Sharpe interview, because the Katt Williams, Shannon Sharpe interview is told at a level, and I'm not knocking either one of those guys, but it's told at a level to where everybody can access it. You don't have to be that smart, that well-read. You don't have to have a command of any sort of history. You could have sat in the back of all your classes from first grade all the way through high school and followed the Katt Williams, Shannon Sharpe interview. This conversation won't be accessed by as many people, won't be as accessible because they don't have a command of history, because we've been taught nothing in school, and you have to be willing to do your own research. You can't have your eyes drenched in racial idolatry that we've all been programmed for. And I'm talking about black people and all these leftists that interpret everything through black and white and through this racial lens. Tucker Carlson went for the jugular. He went for the truth. This is a battle of good versus evil. This isn't a battle of black versus white. This isn't a battle of conservative versus liberal, because what Tucker Carlson's arguing is like conservatives or liberals, they can all be evil. And he got to that at the end, and I'll get there, but so the atomic bomb explanation, and we've seen people react to it, and we've seen someone like a Jeremy Boring at the Daily Wire. He tweeted out over the weekend some kind of comment about if you think America was evil for dropping the atomic bomb, if there was a couple other things he referenced. If you think a couple other historical things, if you think that you must hate, if you think George Bush and the U.S. government or something were involved in 9/11, you just hate your country. I think was, and there was one other thing I can't remember that he tweeted out, and I politely disagreed with Jeremy Boring. But when I politely disagreed, I hadn't watched this interview, and I had no idea that this interview, this conversation, was a part of what Jeremy Boring was reacting to. But what my narrative and what I've been talking about on this show, and what we've been talking about, and if you go back to in the days after October 7th and what happened in Israel with Hamas, and some of us saying, hey, let's pump the brakes and let's figure some things out before we just have a reaction. And we did a show here that you guys experienced where I called it Conspiracy Leery or Conspiracy Weary. I can't remember, but bottom line, the argument was like, we've been fed so many lies by our government that we don't know what to believe. And so when these world events happen, we're skeptical. And we want, let's wait for more information to come in. We just don't want to react to whatever it is we're told. And that's Tucker and this conversation that they had was an explanation of like why American citizens and why someone as smart as Tucker Carlson, why are they hesitant? Why are they skeptical? We're frustrated because we've been lied to for too long about everything. And Tucker talked about how he used to believe everything. He grew up in a life of privilege in Southern California. He believed every lie that has been told to the American people. And again, this is where people are being demonized. It's like, well, he sounds like a leftist. You know, the leftists are complaining about American history and complaining about the things that we've been taught. And so there are scales coming off everyone's lies. Tucker Carlson, I'm putting words in his mouth, but I'm telling you what I think. His argument is like, no, America's founding and its founding documents, awesome, great, still relevant today, still work today. But America changed. And he pointed to the dropping of bombs and the atomic bomb in Japan in, I believe, 1945, there are others, and he probably thinks this as well, but he just thinks this is the most significant thing. But there are others that point to the 1913, 1914, and the Federal Reserve. That's where Royce White and that crowd, and there's truth in that. And so, but regardless, whether you believe it's the Federal Reserve, whether you believe it's the dropping of the atomic bomb, or maybe it's both of them working in conjunction. But there are those of us that believe founding documents are great, the founding of this country great, the founding documents, the founding of this country, and the Christian people of this country ended slavery and kept moving America in the right direction. And then we got overtaken by hubris and the belief that man is all powerful and that this latest iteration of man is so superior to the men that founded this country. And we've lost our mind and we've lost sight of God, and we've allowed this evil wickedness that's in this world. And Tucker argues in this podcast, like, everybody before 1945, everybody believed in the spiritual realm and the spiritual world. Everybody, for years and decades and centuries, believed in the spiritual realm, and that there were these spiritual forces, both good and evil, at work, and that you shouldn't play with them, and you should be on guard for them. And then this secular humanism took over the world, and then this belief that man was master of the universe and that man grants you your rights, not God. And that's why we're in the chaos and mischief and foolishness and depravity that we're in right now. It was a marvelous conversation. And Joe Rogan played his role just as remarkably as Tucker Carlson. And I'm not kissing either one of their butts. I'm just telling the truth, because I think some people that are more familiar with Joe Rogan believe that, like, Joe Rogan was different in this interview than in any other interview. Joe Rogan is a Big Bang Theory person. I think he believes in evolution. But he didn't go there. He didn't have a full-on argument with Tucker Carlson about it. I thought that was appropriate. People have heard Joe Rogan. People have heard the theory of evolution. I think Joe Rogan was sitting there just as a student of life and was like, hey, I don't think Tucker Carlson's smarter than me, but I want to hear what Tucker Carlson has to say on this. He talks to people, all over the world. I'm a comedian. I bring in guests, mostly Americans, to talk to me on my podcast. Tucker Carlson's talking to world leaders. Tucker Carlson's talking to government officials in secrecy. And so let me see what I can glean from Tucker Carlson. And Tucker Carlson made a pretty compelling, pretty confident case that the United States government is aware and is in partnership with spiritual forces. Some of it is hard for me to understand, but I just understand where he's coming from. And he says that, there are things deep beneath the sea, spiritual forces that are moving at, what they say, 500 knots. There's just a physical impossibility to us as man. And Tucker argued Genesis 6 and other and things in Ezekiel and just other things, like saying, no, this has all been talked about in the Bible, that there are these spiritual forces. And we all used to believe in them for years and years and decades and centuries and seemingly forever. And then as we became more secular, and it's a relatively new phenomenon where we've just thrown out our religious beliefs and we believe in science and man and Dr. Fauci and this person and that person, and they're all the smartest people in the world and they're experts. Let's throw the Bible out and let's throw what people have been thinking for thousands of years. Let's throw all that out. And we're the smartest people that have ever inhabited the planet. And a lot of the justification for that is like, they own slaves and we don't. Look how much smarter we are than they are. I've argued on this show and I stand by. It's a stupid contention. We murder babies in the womb. Murder them. We send little suction cups up a woman's vagina to go suck that baby out and crush it. And we think we're more advanced than people that own slaves. It's lunacy. We don't even value life. We have women and men convulsing in the streets. Oh, I can't kill this baby in my womb. The government's trying to stop me. There are forces out here trying to stop me from killing these babies. But we're superior to the people that own slaves. It does not add up. And your racial idolatry stops you from seeing it. You've bought in to the foolishness that somehow the little melanin in your skin makes you special. And oh my God, they did something terrible to me because of the color of my skin, allegedly, 150 years ago. Those people are evil. It doesn't matter that slavery has always been the case in every single ethnicity and skin color has been enslaved. You've been taught a false history that was only you, and you've suffered the worst form of slavery because you were black. And and so it just clouds your vision, it puts scales over your eyes. You can't see the truth. And Tucker got into this in terms of they take kernels of truth and they'll throw it all out there on Wikipedia and wherever. But if they don't frame it for you properly, they can convince you of anything. And so the facts are all out there. It's just who's in control of framing the facts. And so they can turn the facts into lies. And they can convince a group of people, oh my God, look at these facts. Slavery only impacted you, and everybody else was a different kind of slave. And only your slavery matters. If framed properly and you really understood the world's history with slavery and that it continues to this day, you'd have a different point of view and perspective. And again, this is where your racial idolatry is going to blind you. These are two white guys having this conversation. So I can dismiss all of that. And one of them, Tucker Carlson, he's a conservative. Oh my God, he's a conservative. I can dismiss all of that. If he told me today was Tuesday, because he's a conservative, I can call it a lie. Well, that's just a racist lie. It's not Tuesday. It's Thursday. You can ignore the truth. And again, these are the scales that have been placed on your eyes. And I'm looking at Tucker Carlson and I'm like, holy cow, this guy I've watched this spiritual transformation and it's confirmation man, God's word is powerful. God's truth is powerful. I'm watching someone in a healthy, mature conversation say, look how stupid I was. Look how secular I was. I didn't understand the world. And it took me till age 54 for the scales to come off my eyes and for me to see the world clearly. That's what he's doing. He had just a really profound quote. The measure of humility, and again, I'm taking it a tiny bit out of context in the way that he said it, but he said the measure of humility is the ability to tell the truth about yourself. And I was like, there it is. There it is. The measure of humility is the ability to tell the truth about yourself. And that's, his humility is overtaking him. And that's why he's like confessing all of his sins. And he's not ashamed of them, but he wants to share them. He wants to invite you along on the journey of humility and true understanding and to open your eyes to the truth. And so this whole conversation he was having with Joe Rogan was about the search for truth, and are there people trying to prevent you from seeing the truth while pretending that they're for the truth? And that's where he got into trashing Bari Weiss. She's a independent journalist who was at the New York Times for a moment and then wrote a piece launching herself as a brand. She took a dump on the New York Times and how hostile it was to a fair, balanced point of view. And then she launched an independent news site, website, whatever. And Tucker Carlson called her a fraud and went in on her pretty good in this podcast, called her a neocon. And he also, in that, trash, not by name, but he was clearly going after Ben Shapiro and talking about people that are saying they're for free speech as long as they agree with it. And then once they disagree with it, they silence people. And he was basically taking a side in the Ben Shapiro-Candace Owens war. I'm not taking a side in the Ben Shapiro-Candace Owens war. Anybody that watches this show, anybody that follows my Twitter feed, know that I'm a Candace Owens fan, and I'm someone that's a bit suspicious of Ben Shapiro. But I don't know the inner workings of the Daily Wire. Haven't talked to Candace Owens privately about it, so it's hard for me to come down one way or the other. I don't know. But I do know, and you've heard me talk about it, you've heard Katt Williams talk about it, and that's why I'm saying there's this synergy between what Katt Williams is doing and what Tucker Carlson is doing. He's talking about plants. And that's why, again, I hat tip Shannon Sharpe and Katt Williams. They started this conversation about plants. And I know it was mostly Katt Williams, but I have to give Shannon Sharpe credit for hosting the conversation. He was the vehicle that was used to kick off this conversation. And so Tucker Carlson going down that lane, like, hey, there are people pretending that, hey, I'm pro-free speech, I'm pro-America, I'm conservative, I'm this, I'm that. But what's their real agenda? He's asking the question. Are they just neocons that want endless wars? Are they just there to dress up the establishment and make it look like they're a force against the establishment when they're really for the establishment? And that's why this conversation is hitting and triggering people so violently. Because they're sitting there like, holy cow, am I next? What's Tucker Carlson going to say about me? Am I going to get found out? Because this, and Tucker gave a lot of credit to the podcast world, the podcast space, and Joe Rogan or whatever, but I've been here before, and we've been here before. Does anybody remember the early days of the blogosphere? I mean, let's go back to like the launch of Deadspin and I'm talking about for you guys that follow the sports world and the Big Lead and all these blogs that came out, and they were so anti-establishment. They were railing against ESPN and the establishment. What happened as soon as a little money got spread around the blogosphere? They all hopped on board with the establishment. They weren't really anti-establishment. They were just faking it until the payday came in. And so I've seen it happen in my space. And I'm going to call names here, and it's going to sound like I'm viciously attacking these people, and I'm not. I'm just speaking facts. I'm not trying to be unfair to anybody. But, I've already told you about the blogosphere, and you could see it in the media space as well. Take a guy that was my friend, Dan Le Batard. Go look at his history and why we were friends. We were both thumbing our noses at the establishment and calling BS on corporate mainstream media. And that was our connection. And I had a bunch of friends like that in the sports media that liked that either I did it or they did it to the best of their ability. They thumbed their nose at the media establishment and called BS on the media establishment. And then I watched all of them just fall away. And all of them start taking checks. And all of them start, Disney owns ESPN now, and Disney's paying for something else. And so I'm going to pivot. And all the rebels, and again, I like Bill Simmons. And he's more authentic than Le Batard and some of the other people I'll acknowledge. But look at the way Bill Simmons came through the door, the Boston sports guy. And all the jokes that he would crack, all of them politically incorrect. And then when the money started blowing a different direction, and there was more money flowing for, hey, let's pretend to be a feminist. Let's pretend that Doris Burke is the best NBA broadcaster in the world and that Jeff Van Gundy and Mark Jackson, let's blow them out of there for Doris Burke. And then it became a bridge too far. Because, Bill Simmons used to put out pictures of WNBA players and NBA players and say, guess which one's an NBA player, guess which one's a WNBA player. Funny, irreverent, accurate things. It was pointing to an uncomfortable truth. Like, man, you got these WNBA players, they're running around looking like men. And it's not pleasurable to watch. And then that all went away. And the next thing you know, Bill was halfway for diversity, equity, and inclusion and all the other stuff. And again, he's now moved more back to his authentic self. But I've watched the entire sports media and blogosphere put on this act of, I'm speaking truth to power. I'm gonna stand for truth over everything. And then as soon as checks get cut, all right, what do you need me to say? And I'm not patting myself on the back, but nothing I've ever done in this media space has been intentionally fraudulent. I've stayed in my lane. I called BS on the media throughout my entire corporate media career. And when the corporate media decided, hey, we don't like that anymore. Hey, there's special people. Hey, we're uncomfortable with you criticizing Colin Kaepernick. We don't want you to. When it finally got too uncomfortable, I was like, all right, I'm good. Let me go someplace where I'm not going to feel this pressure, where I can just be me. And I've suffered the financial consequences for that. And I'm not putting myself, because the consequences aren't that horrible. And so I don't want anybody to think I'm making myself out a victim. But that's what I see in Tucker Carlson. He's sitting here saying, like, no, I'm really about this life, and I'm just going to follow the truth wherever it leads. And I know I used to not be this way, but that's where I am now, because the scales will come off my eyes and I realize there is a God, and there's only one explanation for the kind of wickedness we're directing at children. This is a battle of good versus evil. I'm going to pick back up. Let me stop for a second, and I got to make room for Dave Smith because I want to bring him into this conversation because I think he'll be interesting. But let me take care of our great friends at Good Ranchers. Tired of your favorite cut of beef or chicken costing more and weighing less every time you buy it? I've got a sizzling solution for you, Good Ranchers. Price Lock Guarantee. This is the only price lock on 100% American meat you can find, and you don't want to miss it. During their April Price Shield campaign, Good Ranchers is locking in your price until 2026 when you subscribe to any one of their boxes full of 100% American meat and seafood that they ship right to your door. Good Ranchers is where I get 100% American meat I can trust, that's tender and full of flavor every time. With meat prices continuing to go up and quality at the store going down, Good Ranchers Price Shield will not only save you hundreds, but also help you put 100% American beef, chicken, pork, and wild-caught seafood on your plates that you can trust. Plus, get an extra 10% off your subscription with my code FEARLESS at goodranchers.com today. What I really love about Good Ranchers, their commitment to transparency. They believe that you have the right to know exactly what's in your food. They're amazing supporters of this show, so go support them and take the mystery out of all the meats you buy. This exclusive Price Shield offer ends the month of April, so if you want to secure your best price on meat until 2026, go to goodranchers.com, use my promo code FEARLESS for 10% off your subscription, free express shipping, and a price lock guarantee until 2026. Goodranchers.com, American meat delivered. I want to pick back up here with something again. It was masterful what Tucker did, and he tried to remove the scales that are on your eyes that will stop you from hearing the truth, and he realizes that racial idolatry is being used to put scales over your eyes and block you from seeing the truth. And so he just mentioned in passing about this black nationalist 80-year-old guy down in Florida who he has interviewed and is going to release the interview, who the Department of Justice is trying to put in prison. And he did this intentionally. One, he's telling an interesting story to Joe Rogan, but it's intentional, because he's a believer in humanity, in God's creations, in the image bearers. He's trying to communicate to you, those of you that have scales over your eyes, these racial idolatry scales that can't see the truth he's talking about because it's come in the wrong skin color packaging. He's telling the story about this black nationalist that he's defending, who's basically like an 80-year-old Louis Farrakhan down in Florida that the Department of Justice, the Biden Department of Justice, has targeted and is trying to lock up because he said that the guy was critical of America's support of Ukraine. He's like, hey, man, we provoked that. We sent Kamala Harris to speak and to invite Ukraine into NATO, which is like a huge giving the bird to Russia and Putin. We provoked them into invading Ukraine. This is this guy's argument. And other people believe that. And they're trying to put this dude in prison. He's 80 years old. He's a black nationalist. Tucker's interviewing said he liked him. He's trying to take the scales off your eyes so you can hear the truth. Like, hey, I'm not here on some racist BS. I'm here, I'm talking about what has been revealed to me by the scales coming off my eyes. I'm a believer. And we've moved into a state in a culture of unbelief that is dangerous and is destroying the country. And then this was brilliant, the way this conversation and the order that was unpacked. They eventually moved into like, hey man, I know they telling y'all Alex Jones is crazy. And I know y'all been made to believe that Alex Jones is a nutcase and he's dangerous. But Joe Rogan, who's known Alex Jones for 20 some odd years, and Tucker Carlson, who's known Alex Jones in recent years and has spent time with him, was like, nah, man, Alex Jones is actually a prophet. And here's the proof that he's a prophet. And being a prophet doesn't make you perfect. They didn't say he's perfect. They said he's a prophet. They didn't say he didn't have misses. They didn't say that, because Joe Rogan unpacked pretty well, like, hey, Alex Jones likes to drink too much. He's under a bunch of stress. He screwed up, and he screwed up the Sandy Hook deal. But how can someone who told you, hey, look, they're going to fly planes into the World World Trade Towers, or what are the the towers, the Twin Towers, and they're going to blame Osama bin Laden. How can someone tell you that and then it happened, and he's just a guy in Texas, and you not think he's a prophet? You think someone slid him the secret plans? And then they played a clip of Alex Jones talk 7 years ago, talking about artificial intelligence. And it's a really complicated clip. And it's like, Alex Jones is unpacking all of this. This is the plans for artificial intelligence. And it's actually going to replace man. And they're going to be smarter than us. They're going to build robots that are smarter than us and replace us. And that artificial intelligence is going to be the destruction of mankind. And he said this 7 years ago, and now look where we are and look at what people are saying. This man's a prophet. Doesn't mean he's perfect. Alex Jones may go to hell for all we know. But is he a prophet? And Tucker makes the argument like that something spiritual, supernatural has gone on with Alex Jones, and he's able to explain these things and able to see these things. And I got to be careful here because many of you will misunderstand what I'm talking about and misinterpret what I'm talking about and think that I'm trying to put myself on Alex Jones's level, because I'm not. But it's just like the level of understanding when you really open your mind and heart to God's powers, you'll just see things completely differently. You'll see things going on in you that are completely different. And so there are times, and I've had these conversations with TJ Moe, and I've had them with Virgil Walker. Like things, when I stepped into this lane, when I said, let me leave corporate America and that money alone and just let me try to serve God. And ever since I made that decision, if you go look at my work, look at the things I was writing when I was at Outkick, the things I've written since I was at Blaze, look at the fire starters and monologues that I do here, look at the things I used to say on Tucker Carlson's show, and how, because I'm every time I tell y'all, like, hey man, I graduated high school with a 2.8 and I did some really sneaky things that are embarrassing I won't talk about to get that 2.8 in high school. And then I say, man, I went to Ball State and I graduated 2.3. And, you know, I spent most of my time drinking and socializing and playing a little football. And I did some really sneaky things at Ball State. And I tell you all, I'm just not that smart. I'm not trying to be humble. I'm just being real. And so when I get here to this stage and when I look back at my writing career, and I just have to acknowledge, it ain't me. There's something that only God can explain that has gone on with me. Why I'm able to take a movie and some biblical point and something in the news cycle and combine them and unpack these things to you all and to myself in ways that are relatable. And I just do it over and over and over and over and over again. People just can't do this on a daily basis. I can't do it. It's God. It's something supernatural. And that's not about me, because I'm nothing. And I'm not very smart. Anybody that's ever met me knows I'm not that smart. But I'll go to bed and I'll be thinking about something, and God will put thoughts in my head and say, hey, connect this dot, this dot, this dot, this dot. It'll be entertaining, and you'll make my point, and then find this scripture, tie it in with this. It ain't me. I'm an idiot. Have you listened to the things that I've confessed to? God sent me a perfect woman for me. And I was so retarded, I let one of my best friends talk. Oh, her booty's not big enough. Can you understand? I was an adult. Damn near 30 when this happened. You know how retarded that is? And you think someone that retarded can write some of the stuff that I write and tie things together? No, I'm an idiot. But there are supernatural forces, and if you give into them and listen to them and look for them, they will assist you and help you if you believe. And so that's what Tucker Carlson is talking about with Alex Jones. He ain't that smart, but man, look at God. It's and so the other and you know, I always like to point to, as it relates to these conspiracy things, I love to point to the JFK assassination and how, you know, it just, the explanations we've been given make no sense. Tucker went down a different route in this Joe Rogan conversation. He talked about Nixon. And like, what were the forces that combined to take Nixon out of the White House? And he argued it's the FBI, the CIA, and Bob Woodward, a plant. And so it was brilliant what Tucker and Joe did and how they piggybacked Katt Williams and Shannon Sharp. They're using different words, but it's the same conversation. Bob Woodward from the Washington Post, he's a plant. He worked for the Navy and was like some rookie reporter at the Washington Post, and he's handed the biggest story in the history of newspapers. He's a plant. And the people that did the Watergate break-in, Tucker said there were 6 or 7 of them, and 6 of them worked for the CIA in some capacity. And then his source, I think he argued for the whole Watergate deal, was a guy that was high up in the FBI, formerly the number 2 guy in the FBI. And he's talking, his argument is like, hey man, we don't have a democracy. We have surveillance agencies and secret government forces that are actually controlling and manipulating and installing and uninstalling people into the White House, into these political positions. And then he tied it all together with, and again, you got to read between the lines. You got to know what you're listening to. The scales have to be off your eyes. But they ended up spending some time talking about Hollywood perversion and how Hollywood works. And then they transition into like Tucker talking about how the politicians we elect, they're actually victims too. FBI, CIA has so much dirt on them, so much sexually compromising dirt on them, that they have to do what they're told or they'll be exposed. Listen to what I talk about constantly on Fearless from the beginning, and then hammered with the whole Diddy deal. But we've been talking about this from the beginning. When I told you all, like, oh, the more dirt they have on you, and when I keep arguing, like, look at the sports broadcasters. Why do they keep hiring all these football players with criminal records? Look at the rap music industry. Why are they hiring and installing and promoting people who can barely spell cat? Tats all over their face. Where else are they going to get a job? What options do they have? They're hiring people with no options, who they sexually exploit, who they secretly tape record at Diddy's house and any place else. They pump them full of drugs. Kanye West will tell you, like, hey, they couldn't do that to me because I didn't kill anybody. He's basically arguing that Meek Mill, they got dirt on all of these guys so they can control them, and they will promote the nihilism and the depravity and debauchery and the lack of morality that they want, so that more people get sexually compromised. And this is why they want to sexualize kids in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade. They want everybody sexually wild. It's easier to compromise those people. It's easier to get dirt on those people, particularly if they can follow your internet web browser and say, oh, well, this person likes child porn. And oh, this person likes 15-year-old girls or 12-year-old boys. They know everything. And if you're closeted gay, they know it. And they'll compromise you with it. Oh, and this person likes transsexuals. That's why they want you in prison. This is where people are upset with me for talking about Stephen Jackson yesterday. Because you got scales over your eyes. You can't see the dots that I'm connecting. This prison mentality. And how they want you in a prison mindset where everything's sexually fluid. You're easier to exploit and compromise if you're sexually fluid, if you live an unrighteous life, particularly a sexual one. They can bring you down at any time. He wrapped the whole thing up with the most basic point that certainly hits home with me and this audience. Weak men and women. And weak men, that's one. And then and women. That's not weak women. That's weak men and women. Easier for them to be seduced by evil. That was his argument. That's my argument on this show. That's why I'm trying to encourage men to be strong, because it's our responsibility. We're the only ones that can stop this wickedness. Strong men. And if you listen to the ending of this deal, he goes through like, hey, Mike Johnson, he's a conservative. Speaker of the House, he's a conservative. He's a Christian. But he's a weak man, and so he'll fold, and he did fold. That's what so conservatism is not going to save you. We're in a spiritual war, and that's why I don't go overboard with the politics, and that's why I'm not liked. Because there are no political solutions to spiritual problems. We have a spiritual problem. We've abandoned the belief in God and a biblical worldview. And so we don't respect the supernatural. We don't expect spiritual things, the customs and traditions we used to have to know, like, I ain't playing with that. I'm not using God's name in vain. I am not going to mock God. And look at America. We're so comfortable mocking God. Look how vulnerable our children are. Look at the chaos we've set off. Look. And they unpacked it like look at transgenderism. You got kids running around, oh, I feel like a woman. Well, let me cut your penis off, little boy. That's evil and wicked. And Tucker gave a very simple analogy, like, let's say you had some anorexic 12-year-old girl, but she felt fat. Would you deny her food because she felt fat? Or would you say, let me get you some help? Because you're not fat, you're actually anorexic. Let me get you into some counseling and let's work on this problem. But that's not what we do now. We say, hey, let's cut those off. Let's give you puberty blockers. Let's cut your balls off, little boy. And we call that gender affirming care. It's evil. It's depravity. Thank you, Tucker Carlson and Joe Rogan. We're going to bring on Dave Smith to get his take on all of this next. Hello, Fearless Army. I'm Jason Whitlock, your leader. I'm going to spend 2024 discussing growth and sacrifice. Hard times are here. Harder times are coming. What has stopped American growth and caused a regression in fundamental freedoms and values? A lack of sacrifice. Our ancestors sacrificed for our benefit. We have not sacrificed to protect the progress they died for. No sacrifice, no freedom. What impedes man's willingness to sacrifice? His ignorance, his perversion, his pride, his ingratitude, and his cowardice, his rejection of God. The Bible is a story about the power and the necessity of sacrifice. Sacrifice is the sun, rain, and fertilizer of growth. Growth is our life purpose. Grow in the knowledge, wisdom, fear, obedience, and reverence to the Most High. Growth requires sacrifice will be our theme for Roll Call 2.0 this summer, June 1, right back here in Nashville. We're excited to welcome you. Let me spend a minute explaining what GROWTH actually stands for us in the Fearless Army. The G is for game plan. In order to properly grow, it's essential we work from the strategic game plan spelled out in the Bible. The R, responsibility. As we grow as men, we understand and accept our responsibilities to God, family, and teammates. The O, ownership. We embrace ownership of our destiny. Outsiders do not determine our fate. The W, wisdom. We honor, value, and share the wisdom imparted to us by elders, coaches, and leaders. The T, trust. We must be worthy of trust. The reliability of a man's word defines him far more than popularity and material possessions. The H, humility. The reward for humility and fear of the Lord is riches and honor and life. That's straight from Proverbs 22:4. Come join us in Nashville as we talk about growth and sacrifice and how without sacrifice there will be no growth. Roll Call 2.0 right here in Nashville, Saturday, June 1st. And so Russell Wilson joining in on that. These ladies deserve so much more. Praying for the day.
You had one job.
But it's not. Russell Wilson's trying too hard. Just, Russell, play your position, quarterback. Talk about what you know.
You're going to create a new banner. This is a Jum Doc alert.
This is a league that has never once, in 30 some odd years of existence, has never once turned a profit.
You're broke! You're f***ing poor!
We're retarded. Russell, that's a retarded statement. Shut up.
Shut up! Just shut up, you idiot!
Welcome back. Let's roll out to New York and bring in Dave Smith. Dave, I mean this as respectfully as I can. All I know about you is that you have a very fascinating Twitter feed that I started following more than a year ago, I think. That's all I know is like, this guy's tweets are fascinating. He comes off as a very honest person. And so if you could, just for my benefit, explain a little bit more of yourself and even you can help me on it. How did you even get on my radar? Why did you get on my radar? I just know you're on my radar and I love what I see. Walk me through a tiny bit of your history.
Oh, okay, sure. Well, so I'm a real person. I'm not just a Twitter feed. There's a guy behind this. So I'm a stand-up comedian. I've been doing stand-up comedy for about 16 years. I'm in New Jersey as we speak now. I'm from New York City originally. So I've just been doing stand-up comedy, and then I got very interested in politics when Ron Paul was running for president in 2008, and I kind of just got totally obsessed with history and economics and politics, and I've just kind of been building from there. So I don't know exactly how I got on your radar, but I just started doing a lot of big TV shows and podcasts and stuff like that. And I'm always pretty happy to give my opinion on things.
Well, awesome. And thank you for joining us. And I was sitting here talking to my team yesterday. I was like, man, I got to talk about Tucker Carlson and Joe Rogan's podcast. I thought it was very important. And I was like, who could we do it with? And I was like, no, we got Dave Smith. He's smart, he's funny, and I saw your tweet challenging Jeremy Boring, and that really put me over the top. And so before I get there, just wanted you to, because I just spent an hour talking my thoughts on what Tucker and Joe Rogan did. And I'm fascinated by what's going on with Tucker because I've known him for some time. But anyway, your general thoughts on that interview.
Sure. So, I mean, to kind of disclaim, I mean, I'm a little biased. I'm friends with both Joe and Tucker. So I've been pushing for years for them to, nudging, I would say, them to have a conversation together since back when Tucker was on Fox, because I just thought it would be such a great conversation. And that really was my takeaway from it. I thought it was one of the best podcasts I've ever listened to. I thought, here you have the guys who are probably the two biggest people in the world of whatever exactly this world is, talking about the state of the country on the internet. And after listening to it, it's like, yeah, no, there's a reason why these two are the two biggest, because it's just I thought the conversation was so interesting and thoughtful, and it was like, man, if we were a nation of grown-ups, this is what corporate media would look like. It would be these type of conversations where they're not just regurgitating slogans and, talking about historical events in the shallowest way possible, which I just see so much of. And look, I mean, that Jeremy tweet that I responded to, I mean, it's just like, it's just so painfully stupid. It reminds me of all the stuff during the George W. Bush years of where, you're either with us or you're with the terrorists. Like, you either think it's a good idea to invade Iraq or you're on the side of Osama bin Laden. Those are your two options. Like, what adult thinks that way? And for you to suggest that perhaps like there's a moral issue with nuking civilian populations, by the way, after the war was won, after Adolf Hitler was dead, after, against the advice of 5-star General Dwight D. Eisenhower, who said it was unnecessary and that the Japanese were ready to negotiate surrender. But if you question whether that's evil, that means you hate your country. Like, well, I have to hate my grandma and just the people of this country because I think a war tactic was immoral. It's, come on, like no one who's capable of speaking and thinking should put forth such a stupid argument.
So Jeremy's tweet was, people who deny the moon landing or suggest America is evil for its use of atomic weapons against Imperial Japan, or who say that George Bush was behind 9/11, actually hate this country. And you responded and called that dumb. And what it is, so it's limiting. It's like infringing on free speech. And what was so important about this conversation and where we need to be as a mature country that believes in free speech is people should be allowed publicly to speak imprecisely without being canceled. Because I've never had a perfect conversation in my home or in private with anybody. And I may slip and say the wrong thing to someone. And they may momentarily be offended, but they may well, Jason's actually coming from a good place. I've known Jason for a long time. We can move past it. But we've moved into this era of this internet censorship deal of oh boy, if you say something I slightly disagree with, we never have to listen to you again. And you should have no conversations that include imprecise words that can be misinterpreted. And that's how you swallow up authentic conversation and disallow it. And it's just completely unhealthy for an allegedly free society that believes in free speech.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. That's exactly right. And look at the results of it. I mean, look at the results through COVID. I mean, can anyone really defend at this point the COVID policies that did so much damage to this country? And then a huge part of the reason why those policies persisted for so long was precisely because of what you're saying, that you weren't allowed to question them. And if you did, you got all types of heat and things that now you could go on any big show and say, oh, the lockdowns were a disaster, and the states that didn't lock down are or ended the lockdown sooner didn't do any worse than the states that did lock down in terms of the controlling the virus, and then they had all these other negative effects. You could say it came from a lab in Wuhan. Now, like, none of that's even controversial anymore. But at a time, you were taking your career in your hands if you were allowed to say that. So I think you're absolutely right. You have to, in order to be a free society, people have to be allowed to get it wrong, because that's the only way that we ever get it right, is if we're attempting to, and we have that freedom to make that attempt.
Dave, what the other thing about this conversation, when I started this show 3 years ago, it was under the belief that, like, there's two groups that are failing us, that are supposed to protect the public square and allow us to talk about things that are uncomfortable. And my argument then was, ministers have failed us. They won't go to the pulpit and speak uncomfortable truths, which then allows the rest of us to follow in. And then I was arguing comedians have failed us because they're allowed to say anything on stage in the name of a joke, and they ridicule the ridiculous. And I was like, now all the comedians, just every punchline is Donald Trump, Donald Trump, Donald Trump. And so, like, the Overton window closed because ministers and comedians have failed to do their job. And so I look at yourself, I look at Joe Rogan, and I say, oh, look, comedians are doing their jobs. They're widening the window for us to have conversations. I still see a failure among ministers, because Tucker Carlson was on Joe Rogan's show arguing the spiritual side, and some fat sports writer, argues the spiritual side on this show. And it's like, ministers should be right there with comedians. It should be comedians and ministers. You're the gatekeepers for conversation. And that's why I'm celebrating you. I celebrate Joe Rogan and a handful of the other comedians that are like, oh, they're doing their job.
Yeah, well, it's I don't exactly understand it, but the woke mind virus has taken over so much of this country. It's seeped into everything, including the churches, and including the Republican Party, and obviously including universities and Hollywood, and that's true in comedy as well. And it was really noticeable around the rise of Donald Trump's presidential 2016 campaign, all through his presidency, all through COVID, all through Ukraine. And it's been very disappointing to see a lot of people who were very talented comedians almost have, like, it's like in Space Jam when all their their ability to play basketball was drained out of them. Like, somehow their funny was drained out of their bodies because they're trying to conform to these absurd standards. And I think that's true for comedians and ministers. I think there was always a remnant who were fighting against this stuff, and for comedians who were making fun of it, and for ministers who were preaching the immorality of it. I thought it was so fascinating to see, and I didn't think exactly about the point that you just made, but you're absolutely right that you would really think that it would be religious leaders who were standing up for Tucker here, and I haven't seen any of that. But what I have seen that I thought was, like, remarkable was supposed conservatives and right-wingers criticizing Tucker for, like, almost like coming at it from this reductionist atheist point of view, like, oh, look at this wacky stuff he's talking about here. And what the idea that that there is a spiritual realm, and that there are both good and evil spirits that interact with humanity. I mean, that is, first of all, that's just true. And second of all, that should be the least controversial statement ever. I mean, look, Tucker made the point that every society in the history of the world until this current moment all knew this was true. So just think about the tremendous arrogance that it takes for you to, like, mock the idea that, that you're right and everybody else throughout all of history has been wrong. And look, I'll tell you this personally. Somebody who, I was a lifelong atheist, and I found God when me and my wife had our first child. And there is just, like, there's two different things here. Okay, first of all, if you just want to be purely scientific about it, objectively, the scientific argument that a creator exists is stronger than the scientific argument that there is no creator. That's just objectively true. It is an ironclad law of science that energy can neither be created nor destroyed. And they have absolutely no answer for this. If we're here and all of this is here, it must have been created at some point. And that implies a creator. Now, that doesn't necessarily imply one religion is correct and the other religion is wrong, but I'm just saying purely scientifically speaking, it's the argument that there is a creator is much stronger than the argument that there isn't one. But just on top of almost leaving that aside, not even an argument for whether God is real or is not, I can just tell you objectively that the way you live your life when you have God in your life is a very different way than the way you live it when you don't. And I was for many years, I was like a real degenerate before I met my wife and got married and had kids. And a big part of that is that I didn't have God in my life. And there's just certain things like I'm not saying I'm perfect. I'm a mess, just like all of us are. And I do things that I shouldn't do. And having God in your life reminds you of that because you kind of know what God wants you to do. And then you're always kind of reminded like, oh, he's probably not happy I didn't do this. Like that fight with my wife was my fault and I probably should admit it, you know. So the point isn't like that I'm such a great person. My point is that all of us are such messes that if you don't have God in your life, it's going to be a real problem. And I know there's atheists who would listen to that and say, like, well, I don't need God in my life to be a good person. And it's like, yeah, okay, good luck with that. You're so great that you don't need this. There's certain things that having God in your life it prevents you from doing because you know there's a God. You know, I could never leave my wife and my kids because I know there's a God and I got to answer to him ultimately. And you know what I mean? It's just, so that's off the table. And just as a country, it's so obvious that we're lacking that in a very profound way. And that's the root of all these problems is there's something, the most important thing is missing.
Yeah. That's why, and when Jeremy tweeted that out, this weekend, I hadn't watched the interview yet. And so I wasn't even aware that he was somewhat criticizing Tucker Carlson. Having now watched the interview and knowing that Jeremy is a Christian and a pastor in his church, I'm sitting there like, whoa. Did you watch the same interview as me? This man is arguing for, Tucker Carlson is arguing for God, and he's on our side. I just, maybe there's some details you can bicker with, but overall you need to be shouting to the rooftops on the biggest platform we have in the media right now, one of the biggest voices we have in America, who was very secular, is now arguing the total opposite. You just got to applaud that and say, hey, I may disagree here too, but wow, that's amazing what just happened on Joe Rogan's podcast.
Yeah, 100%, man. And it's because where's your sense of priorities here? Like, what's the most important thing? And so much of that, right? Like that is essentially the flaw in atheism is that if you remove God, well, whatever the next most important thing to you is becomes your God. By definition, that's your God now. And if the most important thing is yourself, then you're just worshiping yourself. Or if the most important thing is your ideology, then you're religious again. You're just religious for some ideology. And this is how we get really bad things. And so what it kind of says to me, right, is like how, even if you, so what, okay, you have a little beef between Daily Wire and Tucker Carlson right now, like whatever. But like what you just said, like the most influential people in the country are talking and they're promoting the idea of God. How, if you're a Christian, how is that not clearly the most important takeaway here? Because if you're telling me that it's like more important that Tucker doesn't support the U.S. funding Israel's war, like that's more important than promoting God, then that says something about like who is really your God, who is really your master here. And I think, you know, that's kind of my takeaway from it. And I also just don't, I totally, you know, look, like I'm not a religious expert or an expert in anything really, but I just don't understand how being a Christian you would not at least admit that there is an argument about nuking civilians. Come on, there's got to at least be like the onus is clearly on you to demonstrate how that's possibly justified from a Christian perspective. And so and then the other stuff that he threw in about not believing in the moon landing. I mean, I don't have a strong feeling on that one way or the other, but why is that so out of bounds? And look, the truth is, first of all, nobody says George W. Bush did 9/11. Even the crazy conspiracy theorists, no one thinks George W. Bush did much of anything except get tricked. Okay, no, what they say is Cheney did 9/11, if anything. But no, look, I'm not a 9/11 truther, and I think that they oftentimes overstate their case. But most people in the country do think it's a little bizarre that Building 7 fell exactly the same way the two towers did. And that's all they were talking about in that podcast. Neither of them made any claims oh, no, this is actually my theory of what happened on 9/11, not Osama bin Laden, not Al-Qaeda. It was our government. It wasn't anything. It's just, hey, it's kind of crazy bizarre that the only way you've ever seen buildings fall like this is in a controlled demolition. These two huge towers fall, and then another building falls in the same manner. That is just true. It's just bizarre. And I don't know. I think, and I have read a bunch about this, I do believe that Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda attacked us on 9/11. I think they were very clear about their plans to do it, and we have their guys in the country going to flight school and all of that. But again, just to your bigger point, how is questioning whether the government lies to us about these things anywhere near in the same realm of priorities as promoting God on the biggest show at a time when the country so desperately needs it? And, by the way, we do know that the government lies to us all the time. So why should we not be questioning everything they tell us?
And I think what a lot of people believe is, hey, Osama bin Laden, these guys did this, but were there some government organizations or people that knew and could have prevented this, but felt like they could capitalize? Because when you're on the other side of 9/11 and you think about all the surveillance we've allowed of ourselves and the rights that we threw away in terms of the Patriot Act and in terms of allegedly making ourselves safer, it's wow, they took that crisis and took a bunch of stuff away from us. And and that makes people frustrated and suspicious about how did this happen and why? Well, and, did someone allow this?
Well, I can say this, okay? So there was, in the 90s, there was this group, this think tank called, it's known as PNAC, which is short for Project for a New American Century. And there was a bunch of neoconservatives and all of the most influential neoconservatives who ended up in the George W. Bush administration. So it was Dick Cheney and Paul Wolfowitz and Richard Pearl and the whole Robert Kagan, all these guys and Bill Kristol, people who either were writers who supported the Bush administration or people who made up high-level cabinet official positions. And this was, they were writing in the 90s after the fall of the Soviet Union, and they were writing about what Charles Kraudenhammer called the unipolar moment, where basically we now were the only major superpower, and they wrote themselves that what they wanted was essentially what we ended up getting. What they wanted was to fight wars on multiple fronts in the Middle East to demonstrate our power. They specifically wanted regime change in Iraq, and they wanted to they wanted to extend NATO all the way up to Ukraine. So basically all of the things that we ended up, pursuing, which have worked out so great. And they wrote in their own words, this is in the 90s, that they said something along the lines of we probably couldn't get enough public support for these measures short of another Pearl Harbor type event. Now, this is something that the 9/11 truthers would often point to and say, see, this is proof that they planned the whole thing. Now, I think they're overstating their case a little bit there because it's not exactly proof they planned the whole thing, but I think it certainly is proof that when the thing happened, they recognized the opportunity for what it was. And there's no question that after 9/11, that all of these guys were like, we got it. this is our thing now. Because there was no reason to believe Saddam Hussein had anything to do with 9/11 or any connection to the Al-Qaeda terrorists. They just were like, this is the time when America is so scared that if we tell them there's a suspicion that there's a connection between these guys, they're going to give us a blank check to go to war with them. And they cynically took that and used it and expanded all of the government powers that you talked about, like the warrantless surveillance, Patriot Act stuff, all of that.
Dave, my audience is a tiny bit unique in terms, particularly in the conservative space. I don't even consider myself a conservative. I'm a Christian, not more of. I'm just a Christian. But I think some of my audience, particularly the black part of my audience, may be unfamiliar with your comedy. So I just want to talk about you a little bit more personally to introduce my audience. How would you describe your comedy? Who would you compare yourself to? What's your specialty? And then, where can people go find your content and support you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm like, I came out of the New York comedy scene, and like I always like looked up to guys like Dave Attell and Patrice O'Neill and Greg Giraldo and guys like that. I'm probably a bit more political in my stand-up because I'm obsessed with this stuff and I read a lot about it. But I just try to be a funny comedian. When I'm talking on shows like this, I know I talk about like serious topics, but when I'm doing stand-up, I'm just trying to make you laugh and let you have a little, release valve from all the craziness of life. But I got two specials that are out for free on YouTube. You can go check those out. It's Comic Dave Smith on Twitter. And it's just I try to make people laugh or make people think, and that's what I enjoy doing.
So I heard Joe Rogan spent some time, or it briefly came up, about David Tell. And again, I'm not a comedian. I like comedy, all the usual suspects or whatever. But when he said David Tell, and you just mentioned him, goes completely over my head. So now I'm interested because he's like calling Rogan's arguing like that guy's the best comedian, the most technically sound. Blah. Who's David Tell?
He's like every comedian's favorite comedian, and he's been doing it forever. And he had a show on Comedy Central back in the early 2000s called Insomniac. And he's just like a prolific joke writer who always has new material. And he's just, seeing Dave Attell live in a comedy club is just like, to me, the best comedy experience. I don't know how else to say it. He's a New York based guy, and he goes up at the Comedy Cellar and the Stand and places like that all the time. But he's the guy who's like he's your favorite comic's favorite comic. And Patrice O'Neill was the same way too. He's gone now, but he was just like a force of nature, like just a monster of talent. And unfortunately he passed away young. But just when I first started, like watching him at comedy clubs in New York was just like a religious experience. The guy was just so funny. And but those two, I always recommend to people, like those guys were like, to me, when I first started, those guys were like, just like comedy perfection.
Well, Dave, if you ever come through Nashville, come to Zanies, please give me a heads up. I'd love to come see you.
I will be there.
It's hard to get me to go to New York.
Summer.
Oh, great. Because hard to get me to come to New York. I'm afraid. I'm a black man that's considered a conservative. I'm afraid of New York at this point. I used to love to come to New York, but now I'm afraid. But I certainly want to catch you when you're here in Nashville. Zanies, you probably coming to Zanies?
Yes, I'm doing Zanies. It's up on my site. I'll send you the info. I'll be there this summer.
Perfect. Dave, thank you so much. Hopefully we can have you again. Really appreciate it. That's Dave Smith, one of the smartest comedians out there and someone that's out here protecting the public square. Thank you guys for watching. We'll play tomorrow and we'll see you tomorrow.
Freedom, looking for a breakout, feeling like a standoff, nothing in life like freedom. Came like a fighter, striking like a ladder, making all these moves for freedom. I want freedom. No negotiation, my system, no relation. generation, we all just wanna have freedom. Sitting on a corner, never been alone, I'm breaking my back for freedom. Blessed, we are living, get back, we are receiving, all deceiving, we all wanna be free. We want freedom. I wanna be, I wanna be,